Hello folks, I'm going to show you how to create a clay half mask using a clay slab. My inspiration for my half mask is a Japanese menpo. This would have been a mouth guard that would have covered the nose and mouth of a Japanese samurai, and I have created my design based on this inspiration. Okay, so the first step I need to do is I need to cut this out, and I will use this as a template for carving my mask out of clay. Fortunately, I've already cut one out, and here it is. So I'm going to be putting this on top of my clay slab, and I'm going to be tracing around it to get the shape of my clay right. So I'm going to put this off to the side, okay? And let's go ahead and roll a clay slab. So if you've already watched my clay slab video, then you can skip ahead. Otherwise, I'm going to take you through this process from beginning to end, okay? So I'm going to set up my two paddles so that they are parallel to each other like the rails on a train, and I'm going to be rolling right over that to make sure that my clay doesn't get too thin, okay? You need about a handful of clay or so. I'm going to put that right in the middle, okay? You can squish it down a little bit with your hand before you start. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to roll over this with my rolling pin. Now, the main mistake people make at this point is they roll back and forth too fast. They go really fast. And what ends up happening is when they're not paying attention, the clay rolls up around the rolling pin. Let's see if I can get it to do that. No, it's not cooperating. But it will roll up around the rolling pin like this. So as long as you stop before it connects, you can still gently peel it off, okay? And that's because people are going back and forth too fast, and it starts to connect to the rolling pin. Now, make sure that you roll it wide enough, okay, so that your mask template will fit on it. If it doesn't fit on vertically, try rotating the mask so that it is horizontal, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a second. All right, so make sure that you're not feeling any tension from the clay, okay? And if it helps, you might want to just start going in one direction. That'll also help you avoid the clay rolling up around your rolling pin. And then as soon as you're not feeling really much resistance from the clay, that means it is probably thin enough. And it looks like mine is thin enough at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and move my paddles out of the way. Okay, and now we're going to start getting to the fun stuff where we're going to start getting into our clay tools, okay? So I've got my template over here. And fortunately, it does fit across this way, but if yours doesn't fit across that way, it'll probably fit this way, okay? So in fact, let's see, that goes right to about the edge there. I'll go ahead and cut it out this way, but I have plenty of room to cut it out that way. And the way that we're gonna be cutting it out is we're gonna lay our template on top of the clay, and then we're going to use a clay knife. Now this is not sharp. As long as you're careful with it, it's definitely not going to cut anybody or hurt anybody. It's got a round point. And this is great for doing nice, clean cuts. You do not want to use your needle tool, okay? Because this is round, okay? It's like a cylinder at the end, and this will just push the clay. This will make a dirty cut, and it'll create a lot of clay, extra clay crumbs all over the place, and this will make a clean cut, okay? But if you don't have one of these in your bin or someone else is borrowing it, you could use a clay rib. And this is a thin sheet of metal used for smoothing clay. And this, believe it or not, you could use to cut as well, okay? You could cut around the edges. So I'm gonna go ahead and start cutting this mask shape out, okay? And I like to hold the I like to hold the blade, so you'll notice that my fingers are pretty close to the bottom of this clay knife. Again, this blade is not sharp, so it will not hurt you if you hold it this way. Okay, just go nice and slow. When you cut all the way through, like I did, I cut all the way across, you can remove the clay. Don't get rid of this though, because you might end up using this, and I'll show you why in just a minute. So I'm going to start on this side again. Try and get as close to my template as possible. Okay. we're cutting around that edge. If you go a little bit off, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. I'm doing that myself. Okay, but generally it's going to be better the closer you are to the template. And now I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and I'm going to save this too. We might end up using that, we might not. Any unused clay is going to go in the used clay bin, okay? So don't put it back with the fresh clay. All right, so now we have a piece of clay that matches the shape of our template, okay? So the next step is we're going to keep this template in the same place, all right? So there's better tools to do this than this one. Personally, I like using anything with a point. Again, I would avoid using this tool. This has a very sharp point, so you do have to be careful with this. And this, I think, will rip the paper too much. You have to be a little too careful with this one because the paper's getting wet from it touching the clay, and this will probably rip it pretty quickly and easily. So instead of that, why don't we just use one of these wooden clay tools that has a point, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to trace over. You don't have to press down very hard either, but you do need a little bit of pressure. I'm going to trace over all of these lines from my mask design, okay? So everywhere that I drew in marker, I'm going to trace over. And if I do this correctly, this will transfer my design to the clay, okay? Now don't throw away your template after this. You never know. You might end up needing it again. And if you do it carefully, you probably won't rip the paper too much, but you might rip it a little bit. Okay, that's okay. This isn't something that we need to keep nice, so we don't have to hold on to it if it does get ruined, but it's a good idea to hold on to it just in case we need to start over with our clay for whatever reason. Okay, so I'm almost done. I'm tracing around the mouth shape now. I've still got the chin line to do. And the teeth, okay? So the teeth I want to be extra careful with. I want to be very gentle. These are pretty close together. If you have details that are smaller than mine, you might have a hard time cutting them out or building them. So that's why I went over my design with a marker to try and make sure that my lines were not going to be too skinny, too small, that I'd be able to do them in clay, okay? And I'm getting a few rips there, that's okay. Now, I think I've traced over everything. You can also just feel with your fingers, and oops, if you were paying attention, I missed this. So it's a good thing I copied that, checked that with my fingers by feeling it with my hands. Okay, now everything, including the teeth and all the lines, are traced. So when I remove this, and hopefully this will show up on the camera, you'll see two things. One thing, and this paper's getting very soggy, one thing you'll notice is that there is some paper left behind. That's totally okay. The kiln, where we're going to bake the clay at several thousand degrees, which will turn this soft, malleable clay into something close to rock hard, will burn off any of this paper, so don't even worry about that. And the other thing we should notice, and also you could feel, are the indentations from tracing over the mask, the template, okay? So what am I going to do next? Well, I want this mouth to be open. So anything that you want to be open, like nose holes or the mouth, you want to go ahead and cut that out. So it might be hard to see some of your lines. You might have to go over them a little bit more with one of your tools. This is not the best tool for doing this. This is a good tool for cutting, but it's not a very good tool for drawing, okay? Again, if you want to draw and make these lines a little bit deeper so that they're easier to see, I would use just the end of one of these wooden tools, okay? And you can see how I'm making those a little bit darker. Now, a lot of people think that all they have to do is just draw these lines in a little bit deeper and then that's it. That is not the case. We need to add clay and we need to subtract clay, okay? These lines, you can just barely feel them, But we actually want to build up some of the clay where we want parts to stick out, and we want to cut away the clay or remove clay wherever we want to see through it, or we want a hole, or we want to cut into the clay to make a relief. Okay, so these nose holes I'm going to cut out, and again, I like to hold the blade, I like to choke up on the blade and hold it down towards the bottom so that I can manipulate it a little bit more easily. Don't expect these cuts to come out perfect, okay? The clay is very soft, so it's going to move around as you're cutting it. But just to demonstrate again why we don't want to use the needle tool for cutting, the needle tool is great for scoring, right? It's great for scoring, scratching the clay. So when you attach something to something else, you would score both sides, right? And then I would smudge this. I would push down the clay all the way around the edges to make sure it's attached. It's great for scoring. It's great for poking little holes and doing very fine detail work. But if I try to cut with it, it will make a lot of little crumbs that I have to get rid of. Okay, it's not the end of the world if that happens, but personally I don't like cutting with this tool, the needle tool. I like cutting with something that's going to have a thinner, flatter edge. But at the end of the day, it's really whatever works for you. Okay, so just don't expect these cuts to come out perfectly clean. Sometimes I like to do a little saw action. So kind of move the clay knife up and down, and then kind of, you can try and dig the clay out. If it doesn't come out clean, or if it's not coming out easily, just go in and cut it a little bit more. Okay, make sure you're going all the way down to the bottom so you're touching the board. Okay, and then I can try and remove that. There we go, came out pretty clean. Okay, so you can see the edges are a little rough. That's gonna be cleaned up later on. And then here's the tough part. If you're doing something super, super tiny, okay, like teeth, you got to make lots of little, small, deep cuts, okay? And they have to connect. If they don't connect, it won't come out. You won't be able to remove the clay cleanly. Okay, so I'm starting with the fangs, and then I'm going to do the edge of the mouth right here. So I'm doing lots of little cuts. As you can see, that I'm not getting any clay coming out and little crumbs everywhere. Okay, so it's cutting real clean so far. I don't want to cut towards the gums, so to speak. If this was an actual mouth, it would have gums. I want to cut towards the empty space. So this negative space, this empty space that I'm going to be removing, I want to cut towards that so that I can kind of keep the teeth the same shape. All right, so if I try and cut the other way, it's going to squish the teeth a little bit. The clay, again, is very soft, so it will move a little bit as I'm trying to cut it. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so that's even on both sides. So I want my teeth to be symmetrical, so I got the same number of teeth on both sides. And then down here, it's a little hard to see, so I'm not sure if you can see this on camera. I can see it a little bit better down here. So there's one tooth, and I believe I have 4 teeth right here. So got that one, and then one more. And I really love working with the clay. It's really fun. You can make almost anything you can imagine out of it, but it is a process. It's not going to look perfect day one, part one. Okay, so you can see that did come out, but it came out a little rough. If the teeth are coming out with it, just kind of try and push them down gently. Okay, and let's see if this comes out. So just watch the little parts that might be stuck. So you can always go back in and cut a little bit more. I don't think those teeth are as separated as I needed them to be. There, that's better. Getting a little stuck around here. I don't want to lose that tooth. I can always add it back if that happens, but it's just easier to avoid that. Okay, let's see. And I can't wait to show you the finish mask. So the one that I made that is all finished. Okay. And what we're going to talk about next is, so right now I'm doing a subtractive process. I'm cutting into the clay and removing the clay that I don't want. And you're seeing this is coming away pretty cleanly, so that was nice. And so I'm going to squish some of the teeth back down. They're sticking up a little bit. All right. And I'm very happy with how those came out. You can see they have slightly rough edges, so we'll clean those up when we're finishing. So that's one subtractive method, is cutting parts out that you want to see through. So as you can see through that right now. All right. Another method that you're going to be using is you're going to be using these tools, so they kind of look like popsicle sticks. And you can do this with most any of the wooden tools. They all have different ends and do different things, but these sort of curved ends are really, really nice for shaping the clay. So the level 1 is just drawing into the clay. It's just sort of drawing into the clay, not pressing down so hard that you're going through it, right? That would be a big problem, because then the clay would be cut and it would separate. It would fall apart. But this is pretty basic. Anybody, any age can do this. But if you want to take this to the next level, which I recommend doing, is eventually you're going to want to shape the clay as you're removing it. So what I mean by that is, for example, right here, I want that line to be a little bit deeper. So I'm actually going to turn my tool a little bit and take out more clay, right? So that it's not just a line, but it's actually more starting to become a 3D form. It's almost becoming like part of a face, where you can feel that indentation. Now these lines are supposed to be the lines like the bags under the eyes, the sort of the wrinkle lines almost to a certain extent. But I actually might cover these up because I want to build up a little bit more texture here. I want more, I want like cheeks sticking out, and I want the nose to stick out, and I think I want lips sticking out. So I'll show you how I would do that real quickly. So these are two subtractive methods where you're carving into the clay, okay? And then starting to pull away a little bit more, and then if you get all those, you can smooth those crumbs out with your fingers, right? And you can make them more into shapes that are really obvious to feel. So this would be level 1, this would be like level 2, where you're creating a little bit more three-dimensionality, a little more depth. Again, you don't want to go too deep, because then the mask will fall apart. You'll accidentally cut the clay. Now I'm going to show you some additive methods. So I'm going to add clay to this. So the first additive method I'm going to do is I want to just make these cheeks stick out more. Okay, so I'm going to cut out a shape like this, and if I wanted to, I could trace that onto the clay using my template. So that's another good reason why we don't want to throw out the clay, right? So there's that shape right there. So I don't necessarily have to guess what it looks like or draw it again from scratch. And then it looks like that I just need a piece that comes up here, curves up there, and then around here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out, and I'm going to go up there to a point, and I'll show you why I'm doing this. So I'm going to pull this out, this cutout, okay? And what do we need to do again? Anytime you're going to attach clay, you need to do your scoring, okay? A lot of ceramic artists would use slip. They would use a very wet type of clay, almost like a glue. It's not required. We're going to do without, okay? But you definitely want to score both sides. So you got to scratch in the clay. That's going to create like a Velcro type of hold by roughing up the surface. And then I'm going to lay this clay on top. And then we've got to do the smudging or the blending. These tools, the wooden tools, are fantastic for the smudging or the blending. So what you do is you take that paddle and you push the clay down. So whatever you're adding on top, it's going to end up a little bit smaller than what you started with, because you're going to push down the clay all the way around whatever you add. So any details or three-dimensional parts that you add, any clay that you add that you want to stick out, you've got to smudge away all around the entire edge until you don't see that line. So on this side, I've smudged it or blended it all the way around so you don't see that line anymore. Over here, you can still see that line. So I need to go all the way around. Okay. And if you score it and then you smudge it or blend it, pushing down the clay, scratching the clay first and then pushing the clay down so it joins all the way around, so you remove any seams or lines, that clay will hold 9 out of 10 times. If you don't do that, it will probably fall off or break, okay? So that's usually where we separate the folks who are paying attention and know how to construct well with clay from the folks who weren't paying attention and don't know what they need to know to build something out of clay, okay? So you can see that right now I'm building up that cheek slowly but surely. So I'm going to go back in and redefine mouth line a little bit now. But now the nice thing about that mouth line, that sort of line between what that connects the nose to the mouth to the cheek, separates the cheek, is that now it's like a valley or a mountain. You can feel that bump right there. Okay, so I'm going to do this off camera, I think, or you can speed up the video or speed ahead if I do leave this in. But I'm going to add some clay all the way around here for lips, and I'm going to add some clay here to make the nose stick out. Okay, what I can also do, but you have to be super careful about this, is you can push the clay forward ever so slightly, but you need to put something on the other side, like your fingers, to create some resistance. Otherwise, you're just going to push against nothing, and you're going to rip the clay. So you do have to be pushing against something. Okay, so I'm going to want that nose to stick out more. All right, so I can make the clay a little bit thinner, but I also want to add clay to this. Okay, so it's a little premature to push that out, but I just wanted to show you what I'm going to be doing here in just a second. Okay, so let's go ahead and add a few more details. At this point, if you want to speed up the video, that would be fine. But if you want to watch the whole process from beginning to end, just stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Okay. Pull out that cutout, then add that to the cheeks. One thing I should have showed folks by now is also how to add parts with coils. So what I was doing right here was just making sure that would fit, and then I'm just going to score both sides. I also want to use coils to add three-dimensionality to this mask. Okay, so I'm going to get this set, so I'm ready to smudge it and blend it all the way around. Okay, so as soon as you add it, then you're going to smudge, you're going to blend to pull that clay down all the way around. Okay. And again, it's going to look a little messy right now because this is a process. We're going to have a chance to smooth all this out once we get it constructed a little bit better. Okay, so go slowly, go carefully. But for something like lips and smaller details, we probably just want coils. So what you need for that is grab a little bit of clay, okay, and you're going to squish it up in your fingers, and then you're going to roll like a snake or a worm. Now keep in mind, because we're going to smudge this together, you need more clay than you think you do for these parts. Okay, so this looks like a good coil for these lips. So let me go ahead and add this. Again, every time you add something, you're going to do scoring. And I'm going to score this too. So you just cut into the clay. Real messy, like real quick, like not too deep. You just scratch it up. Lay that down. Okay, and then we're going to smudge all the way around. Don't wait till later to smudge because you'll forget. So just as you add every piece, okay, you're going to smudge all the way around. And then from my point of view, it's a little hard to see, so I'm going to turn this around. You got to be gentle if you're picking up the mask though. And then not too much to smudge to connect it to right here other than the teeth. So I'm going to kind of push it in. So you push in and then pull down, push in, pull down, push in, pull down. And again, that's how you do your smudging, your blending, okay? And then you can see that I'm getting a lip shape right there, right? So that was by using a coil. So I would add another coil here for another lip. I think I would want a little bit more depth, a little more thickness here for the chin. So again, those are the two additive techniques I wanted to show you where you're adding clay. So slabs, pieces of flat clay that you scratch up. And then coils, so little sort of snakes of clay that you can roll between your hands, and then add by scoring and smudging. Okay. So I'm liking this so far. So the nice thing about this is that now the mask is becoming less flat, it's becoming more three-dimensional, and this is what you can do with clay. It's got some rough edges, we can clean that up later, but this is some good progress right now. So I've got a lot left to do, and I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. But if you want to speed up the video and jump to the part where I've got all of this added already, then you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and keep filming though, so that you can see the entire process if you so choose. I'm going to add some clay here. Actually, all of this I think I'm going to add. I'm going to cover all of this with some clay, so I need a nice big piece here. And then we'll go over some finishing techniques. Okay, so that's kind of the shape I'm going for. Yeah. Yeah, not bad. All right, so score it, smudge it. That's the theme. Scoring and smudging. That's how you get the clay to work. Otherwise, these parts will just fall off in the oven, in the kiln. Okay. And you can't cook the clay in a regular oven. You need a special oven for clay that can heat it up to an extremely high temperature. Okay. Turn this around so I can see all of it. Now, one nice thing about adding clay to the nose area is that now that the clay is a little bit thicker, you don't want the clay to be super thick. Like if it's thicker than 2 fingers, that's actually too thick and it won't dry fast enough, or it won't dry evenly, and it could actually accidentally break in the oven because of that. But now that I've got some extra clay here on the nose, I am better able to sort of stretch it out and push it forward without risking it breaking because the clay would get too thin. So as you can see, I'm sort of pushing against my fingers. So you need some resistance. You need to be pushing against something so that you don't just rip or tear the clay. But I can sort of shape that nose now a little bit more to make it a little bit more three-dimensional, a little bit more nose-like. Now, I don't know exactly what kind of demon I'm making right now. I am thinking of sort of like a monstrous sort of spirit that this mask is embodying, but I don't have a specific one in mind. And it's okay if you don't, but it would be a really good idea to do a little bit more research. And, you know, I'm not Japanese, so I don't necessarily... and even if I was Japanese, I wouldn't be obligated to do this, but I don't know a lot about the Japanese spirit world or various demons. You might, but so I'm just sort of doing a generic sort of scary face based on the inspiration. But it would be really cool to do a little bit of research and look up, I don't know, maybe demons in general, or maybe even Japanese demons, and to learn a little bit about the culture, or just learn a little bit more about this topic, so I can be a little more specific, but maybe that's for another day. I think that'd be cool though. And so I've got the nose sticking out a little bit more now. You can see that I've indented it in the back, so the nose is sticking up a little bit more. Again, I don't think you should pick up your mouth very often, but you can a little bit if you're gentle and careful. Okay, I'm going to smooth out some of the smudging down here. Let's add another coil for that top lip. And then I think we're going to fast forward to a more finished version of this mask. I do want to show you some of the finishing techniques though. So that's coming up here in just a second. Okay, so just making sure it kind of fits first. Then I'll do the scoring. Kind of looks like a mustache as I'm adding it there on that upper lip area. Okay, so that'll go right there. Now, doing this smudging around the teeth, that's really risky because I don't want to squish those teeth down too much. I don't want to lose them. I want them to stay attached. I could always add them back if they fall off or if I squish them too much, but it's just going to avoid a lot of headaches. And I'm going to squish this a little bit more too, blend this, because I had to roll the coil back over itself, so it wasn't super connected well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to carefully smudge along that upper lip so I don't move this coil too much. Again, push in, pull down, push in, pull down. The rough parts you can smooth out with your fingers. Okay, at this point, there we go. So this is getting real nice. We're getting some three-dimensionality on the cheeks. Okay, they're getting a little thicker. The nose sticks out a little bit more. The lips stick out and the chin sticks out. And again, if I want to, maybe for the chin, for example, because I added a little clay there, I could always push that out with my finger as long as I'm pushing against my other fingers with it. And I can make that part stick out a little more too. Isn't that cool? So that's looking really nice. Those teeth I need to work on a little bit, need to smooth them out. Now this is a part that is probably the most time consuming, because what I need to do is I need to go in here and use just the edge, the point of my wooden tool. I don't want to use the metal tool anymore. The wooden tools are better for this kind of detail work because the clay won't stick to them as much as it might stick to a metal tool like this, especially with a smooth surface. So once you get into the very small details, it's much better if you actually just use the wooden tools, because the clay will be less likely to stick to it, okay? So you can kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm removing little crumbs of clay. I'm trying to cut them off or smooth them out. I want to get those teeth sort of to have smoother edges than they do right now. Try and get them all about even heights, so I might have to squish down some of them. And this is what we're talking about with the process. So you want to be real observant, detail-oriented. Try and get into all those little nooks and crannies. You can smooth out the tops also with these tools. So if you see some clay sitting on top that's in the wrong spot, you can kind of use the side to sort of your tool to sort of smooth that out, as I'm doing. So like these top teeth, for example, are not very smooth on top, so I want to smooth that out more. And that's also giving me a little more surface area when I do that, so it's making the teeth a little bit bigger, or at least they look a little bit bigger like that. And I want to push the clay in because the teeth don't connect to the lip, right? So there would actually be some separation there. I don't actually want like a lot of separation, like I don't want to cut into the clay because I want it to stay attached. But I can add a little bit of a line there to sort of give the impression that they're two separate things, and then I can push in with my tool to make the teeth kind of look like they're going up into the gums more, so they don't just stop. Okay, do that on the bottom. It might be a little hard to see on camera. I'm using mostly a point. I'm kind of sticking under there, right? So it can be a little messier in the back where people won't be able to see it as easily. I'm going to turn this around just from my vantage point so I can kind of see this part a little bit better. So we're going to smooth that out, right? And we've got a lot more work to do, but this is really fun. I'm enjoying this a lot, so I don't mind spending a little more time with this. But this is the main idea. If you've watched to this point, then I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're super interested in doing getting better at using clay. I think clay is a lot of fun. It's one of the most ancient art forms. It's been around. There's been wheel throwing, like making pottery on a wheel, for 10,000 years. So humans have been doing this for quite a long time, working with clay. So we were using clay way before there were wheels, but that was a very early technology where you could put a piece of clay on a wheel and spin it around mechanically using your muscle. All right. So as you can see, I'm sort of brushing off some of the crumbs, the clay crumbs with my fingers, trying to smooth out some of the edges, but it's definitely not perfectly smooth by any means. And I think this is a good point to talk about the finishing. So after you add all your details, and some folks are going to have more details than others, and that's okay. I think the more detailed it is, the better. I want to kind of have that nostril sticking out a little bit more, so I'm going to carve into the clay there. I'm going to pull some of that clay out a little bit more, try and make it look like that clay goes in there as like a nostril. I don't want a line though, because if you look on your face, you're not going to see a lot of sharp lines like in a cartoon or a comic book or something like that. Like, it's mostly going to be shapes. Although there are some of us get lines as we get older, but even the lines are more like shapes. Even wrinkles are more like shapes because they're like peaks and valleys. You know, parts of it stick out and parts are deeper. There, that's looking a little more like nostrils on that side. That's looking a little more like nostrils on that side. So yeah, we're pretty happy with this at this point. And what we want to do is we want to start to smooth it. We want to start to smooth it and to do the finishing work. So I want to make sure that my edges are real clean. okay? Just like if you were getting a haircut, you wouldn't want sort of messy, scraggly bits all over the place. You'd want it to look clean, right? So you can smooth parts out with your fingers, okay, to get rid of some of the bigger crumbs and little issues, but you're still gonna have divots and little pot marks and things like that all over the place. So what you do at that point is, at this point, let's say that we're done building. Now, I don't really want to be done building because I want to keep adding details and things, but just for the sake of this video, we're going to go ahead and keep it moving. I'm going to add just a few more lines here, like a line right there, maybe a line right here to make them look a little bit more fearsome and angry. Make sure these lines are in there. Oh, and then I was talking about making these a little bit deeper. I keep saying I'm done and then I'm not. That's the fun part about clay. You keep finding things that you want to do to it. But let's say at this point we're somewhere where, you know, we could move on. All right, so what do we want to do? Well, we got to do a couple of things. One thing we've got to do is, you might notice that this is still very flat. So we want to bend this over something. So we need a form, something to support this, so that as it dries, it'll dry in a curve, which means it'll fit more easily onto a face, right? So you could actually wear this if you want to. We're also missing some things. We need some holes so that we could attach this or wear this. We could tie it with string, wire, or ribbon. We also need to do the finishing and smoothing things out. So I'm gonna save the smoothing out for just a second. First, here's the last few steps. So when you get your mask pretty much done and there isn't anything more that you wanna cut out or add, okay, let's move that out a little bit. Then what you're gonna do is not too close to the side. I would say about a pinky width away from the edge, from any edge. You're going to take a straw, so you're gonna have in your tool bin a straw, and what the straw is for is to cut a circle out of the clay. So you're gonna push into the clay until you get to the table or the board, and then you're gonna pull out, okay? So some of the clay might come with you. You can try and push that out of the straw so someone else doesn't have to deal with your mess. And then you're gonna have a real nice clean hole that you could use to attach some string, a ribbon, or some wire so that your mask could actually be worn. Okay, so that's really cool. So very important step, use the straw, make some holes, okay? Step number 2, we need to bend this over a form, and my form is right over here. So I'm gonna be using this curvy sort of egg shape, and I'm gonna be resting the clay on top of this. Now this is plastic, but at this point the clay is dry enough, since I've been working with it, where it's not going to stick to this. It's only gonna stick enough to where it's not gonna fall off. So I'm gonna push this down gently. I don't wanna squish it. I just wanna sort of bend it gently, so I'm using most of my hand to do that. And I wanna make sure that it is fitting onto this form. So I'm gonna push down all the places, the lips. Now the nose I want to stand up, so I'm not gonna push that down, okay, so don't fall for that. But the cheeks, under the eye spot, the edges, all that I want to bend around this form. So you can see if I pick this up, which you're not going to do, you don't need to pick this up, you can see now that it's bending. All right, so very cool. The last step for the finishing, now that it's on here, is we're going to be polishing this with a little bit of water and a flat brush. So a flat brush means it's straight at the end, and you need so tiny of an amount of water, like barely put any water in your cup, okay? And what you're gonna do is you're gonna brush over this. Now, you have a sponge in your bin, and you can also do this with your sponge, but you need to wipe off the water before you apply it. So I did do that for the first stroke, and then the water was dripping off. You don't want to add a lot of water. If you add a lot of water, your clay will get wetter. It'll absorb that moisture, it'll get softer, and it could potentially get so soft that it fell apart or slid off of your form, okay? So you don't need to add a lot of water. You want the brush to be doing most of the work. So it's the bristles of the brush that are smoothing out the rough spots. But this is what makes your clay mask or your clay work in general look more finished, is because you don't see all those rough edges anymore, and those pock marks will get filled in. Now they won't all get perfectly filled in, okay, so don't expect a miracle, but it will smooth parts out a lot. So I would do this all over the place, like inside the parts that you cut out, And on top, of course, especially, because you definitely want the outside, the visible parts of your mask to be very, very smooth. You don't need to smooth out the other side. No one's going to see that side. Okay? And I'm just moving the brush back and forth. I'm like along the lines, along the shapes that I'm trying to smooth out. Okay. And anywhere where you see any sort of little cracks or divots, pot marks, you know, like somebody who had really bad acne growing up, you kind of want to try, we're going to fill those in. So we're almost doing kind of like a little plastic surgery here on this face. I want this face to be gruesome, but I want it to be looking really finished and professional too. So I want to smooth out a lot of these rough edges and things. Now, getting the teeth smoother, that's going to take a little more time, and that's something that I might do later. That's going to take a little more work because I really want the teeth especially to look really nice and smooth. But just for the purposes of this demonstration, I want to show you how you can use the brush. I'm using a little bit of pressure, but I'm not pressing down super hard. But I can definitely feel the pressure as I'm moving the brush around. I'm sliding the clay around a little bit. Okay, so if you have very small details, you want to watch out that you don't just cover those up. You want to kind of go next to them or along them. You can kind of imagine that you're painting your mask just with clay, so that might help. So maybe, again, don't paint over the designs. Not too much. Paint over them a little bit to smooth them with the just the water in the cup. Oh, don't forget to wipe it on your sponge. Okay. All right, and you want to get to the sides. Anything that could be visible, you want to get the edges, the sides, and the entire surface. Okay, so this will take a good amount of time. Okay, but it is well worth it when you see the results and everything looks really nice, polished, and smooth. Okay. So at this point, if you want to speed up the video a little bit, it wouldn't be a bad idea if you want to jump ahead to see what I do next or to see the finished result. But like I said, I want to show you the one that I did before this here in just a little bit, but I do want you to see the whole process, because art is all about the process. It's the time. You get out the time that you put in, usually. Not always, not a guarantee. Nothing in life is guaranteed. But a lot of the time and effort you put into something is what you get out. And that's really nice, because that life doesn't always work like that. But art often does. And it's nice to have things that you can sort of rely on like that. So as you can see, I'm getting the lips smoothed out a little bit. Any of those little cracks or rough edges are smoothing down a little bit as I work the brush around. There's still going to be little rough patches here and there. But again, it's just a matter of time. You can fix all those. Some of these teeth are sticking up a little bit too much, so I got to push those down so they're touching the plastic form, the egg-shaped form a little bit more. And again, you got to get all the edges, even the sides, People forget about the sides sometimes, but you're not going to. You want yours to come out looking really professional, like something that you could sell at a store. And then once we're done with this, we're going to let it dry. The clay is going to change to a lighter color as it dries. So it'll become bone dry, and it'll be almost kind of white like a bone that's bleached in the sun. So super, super dry. And then when it's that dry, it's ready to go in the kiln, because if there's any moisture left in it, it could potentially break. So we don't want any moisture in this. So we got to let it dry for a long time. And then when it's dry, it's going to go in the kiln. We'll bake it for a long, long time at a very high temperature. And then when it comes out, it will be almost as hard as stone. Now, very breakable, but also very, very hard, like stone. So that's super cool that you could take something soft and malleable and transform it into pretty much anything you could possibly imagine. Yeah, that's That's one of the reasons people like clay so much. It's so cool. And again, humans have been using clay for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. For all I know, maybe even 100,000 years. I just don't know for sure. So it is a very ancient art form, and people still love doing it today. So you could be a ceramic artist if you like this. If you wanted to, you could study ceramics, become a professional ceramic artist, and make stuff like this all the time if you wanted to, okay? But you also are learning just three-dimensional building skills in general. They could transfer to 3D printing, 3D modeling, and more 21st century skills in media, okay? So right there, I've got my finishing done, or just about done. Of course, I could spend a little more time and get something even better. But let me go ahead and leave it there. I gotta wash this brush out really good, so I'm gonna take this to the sink, wash this out under water, get all the clay out of here, dump this out, and rinse this water. All of this excess clay, I'm gonna bunch up, okay? And this is gonna go in the used clay bin, okay? I'm gonna make sure all of my tools go back in the tool bin, all right? And then I'll put this away to dry, I'll wipe off my board, I'll put this in my storage so that I don't lose it. And there you have my clay mask. So I'll hold that up a little bit closer, hopefully you can see it. And we'll leave it drying on this form so that it will stay this shape. If I took it off this form right now, it would collapse very slowly because gravity would be working against it, and the clay is very soft. It's not going to hold up to gravity. Now I can see a few spots where I still need to go in there and finish a little bit more, like right here, okay? Where you can see a few pot marks that I might have missed because I wasn't looking at it from that angle. So you do have to spin it around all the way, look at it from all the angles, okay? But you want to be careful if you're holding it up like I am right now, because you don't want it to fall off and break. But yeah, we're really happy with that. So I'm going to put this one on the shelf so it can dry, and then it'll go in the kiln. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this.